And even this question shocks people sometimes when you say, who is Dajjal? Because they say, surely it's a question of what is Dajjal? Firstly, no, Dajjal is a human being. He's not a monster or a creature that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has created. He's a human being. And like you and I practice and exercise our free will, Dajjal has exercised his free will to be the person that he will be when he appears at the end of times. Now we'll come to the ahadith of his appearance. But we should ask first, what's the beginning of the story of Dajjal? Meaning, what's the origin story of the Dajjal? Where does he come from? Who is he? Who are his parents? Generally amongst the scholars, and particularly the scholars of hadith, there are two dominant positions as to the origin story of Dajjal. And I wish to cover both today. The first position takes us to Al-Madinatul Munawwara. Interestingly, to the time of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And he takes us to a man known as Ibn Sayyad. Now the story of Ibn Sayyad begins as per a hadith in the Jami' of Imam al-Tirmidhi. Sayyiduna Abu Bakr radiyallahu ta'ala anhu, who was one of the companions of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he says that the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam upon one occasion taught us the description of the parents of Dajjal and the circumstances in which he will be born. Now it just so happened that at that time, Sayyidina Abu Bakr had heard of a child that had been born to Jewish parents in the Jewish community of Al-Madinatul Munawwara. Now the hadith doesn't say explicitly, but there must have been something suspect around the birth of that child that piqued the curiosity of Sayyidina Abu Bakr radiyallahu ta'ala anhu. So he says, I went to Sayyidina Zubayr ibn al-Awwam radiyallahu ta'ala anhu, and I said to him, let's go to this household where this child has been born, this Jewish household. When they go to the house and they see the parents of the child, they're welcomed by the parents of the child, immediately they're reminded of the description of the parents of Dajjal. That when they see the father is Tuwal, Darib al-Lahab, كأن أنفه من قار. That the father is just as the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam described, that he's tall, very skinny, and he has a large nose, so large that it looks like a beak of a bird. وأمه امرأة فرداخية طويلة اليدين. That this child's mother, she's thick-set, she's fat, she has long hands. So then they ask the parents, هل لكما ولد? That you have a child. They say, مكثنا 30 عاما لا يولد لنا ولد. They said, we tried for a child for 30 years, but we were unable to have a child. Just as the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam said would happen in the circumstances of the birth of the Dajjal, that his parents will try for 30 years, they will have no child, but then they will have a child. So they said, مكثنا 30 عاما لا يولد لنا ولد. That for 30 years we've been trying and we didn't have a child. ثم ولد لنا غلام أعور أضرس أو أدر شيء وأقله منفعة تنام عيناه ولا ينام قلبه. But they said after 30 years we had a child. He has a deformity in one of his eyes. He's the most evil thing we've ever come across. His eyes sleep, but his heart never sleeps. Imagine how strange that would be for the companions of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, that these Jewish parents are dismayed at the child that they've given birth to. 30 years they've been trying for a child, they couldn't have a child. And when that child's born, they say he has a defect in one eye. He's the most evil thing we've come across. He has no أقله منفعة, there's no good or benefit in him. And his eyes sleep, but his heart never sleeps. So they leave the parents and they go out to see the child. When they see this child, هو منجدل في الأرض في قطيفة هو منجدل في الأرض في الشمس في قطيفة. They see that the child is wrapped in a blanket and he's almost bathing in the sun. وله حمحمة, and they can hear the child muttering something. Hamhama, the scholars say, is a sound like if you ever see horses running. The way the horses breathe when they're running was the sound that this child was making. Hamhama. So Sayyidina Abu Bakr radiallahu an and Sayyidina Zubayr ibn al-Awwam radiallahu ta'ala anhu start speaking amongst themselves about the strange nature of this child. When all of a sudden, kashafa an ra'sihi, that the child takes the throw off from over his head. And he looks at the companions and he asks them, what are you saying about me? And they were in shock and they asked him, do you understand what we say? And he says, تَنَامُ عَيْنَايَ وَلَا يَنَامُ قَلْبِي. My eyes may sleep, but my heart never sleeps. In another narration in the Sharh Sunnah of Imam al-Baghawi, and then the companions just left. In another narration in the Sharh Sunnah of Imam Baghawi, the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam hears that a Jewish woman of this description has given birth to a child of this description after 30 years. So the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam goes with some of his companions to the home of that child. The child's there in a qatifa, wrapped in a blanket, and he's muttering something. As the Prophet ﷺ goes near him to hear what he's saying, his mother says, Ya Abdullah, hadha Abul Qasim. Oh Abdullah, meaning his name at that time was Abdullah ibn Sayyad. This is Abul Qasim, meaning this is the Prophet ﷺ. And the Prophet ﷺ said, Ma laha qatalaha Allah, law tarakathu labayyana. Now why did this woman do this? If she had left him, it would have become clear what incantations he's reading. Because the mother of Ibn Sayyad alerted him to the Prophet ﷺ, he stopped wherever it was he was reading. So the Prophet ﷺ said that if she had left him, it would have become clear whatever it is he's muttering, what his hamhama is.